Welcome! In this video, we're going to go over the code sample used along with the Sauce Labs Web Application Tests module in our Quickstart guides. We're going to be using a Java test suite that uses the JUnit4 test runner. You'll need to make a copy of the Selenium course example code public repo, and I'll show you where to find the particular samples we're working with. Since this is Java code, you'll need to go into the Java folder, and then we're going to choose the Quickstart directory. And we're working on Module 3 with the web app tests. 3.03 will contain the example code that you'll be starting with to follow along. As you can see here, I have the IntelliJ IDE open with the entire Quickstart project folder. When you run your test, however, you'll probably want to just open the 3.03 folder on its own within an IDE so you can use Maven to manage and run your tests. Right now, we're going to look at everything in the Module 3 folder for the purposes of comparing what the different test suites look like. Right now, we're going to take a look at the relevant directories and files. In the 3.03 test suite, you'll see a source file, which will contain a test file, which will contain a Java folder, and inside of that, you'll have your page objects and tests folder. You'll also see the pom.xml at the top level of the 3.03 directory. This is important for importing all your necessary dependencies in order to run this test suite. In this test project, you'll notice that inside the tests folder, there's a config file. This config file creates all of the variables that you use for settings and for capabilities within your test. It's easier to just change your variables here than having to dig through test code. Notice how in your starting folder, you only have two variables, the base URL you're testing against and the name of the browser you're testing against. However, if you look at a later version, you can see things like the platform name, browser version, Sauce username and access key, and even the tunnel name. Before we go into talking about running this test locally, I wanted to go over the structure of this a little bit. You'll need to have a JDK and Maven installed on your computer correctly with the correct environment variables. This project is set up using the page object model, where we have different classes that are used for interacting with the pages themselves, and then we have different classes that test certain pages. For both the set of page objects and test objects, there will be a base page and a base test. If you look here in the base page, you'll notice that there are several methods that are created that can be used over and over by the page objects. These are things like visit, click, and type, which use some error handling, as well as adding in some common things that you don't need to write over and over again. They're then used in your page object, such as the login page, to make much simpler, easier to understand test code. Now let's take a look at the base test, which is the heart of all our test files and one of the files we'll be editing the most. Notice that we have resources at the top that are imported, such as the WebDriver Manager, JUnit, and Selenium. If you notice, in the pom.xml, these elements are imported as dependencies so you can use them in your base test. It also imports the settings from the config file. This first base test class is very basic. It instantiates a driver, and we create a rule. Underneath the rule, we use an override to create a before class, and this simply sets up WebDriver Manager so we have drivers to communicate with the Firefox or Chrome browser. Last but not least, we have the quit method. This base test is used to set up every single one of our other tests. Each of the test files extends the base test using the before and after functionality to set up and tear down for each test method. In order to get your test to run the same way I am here, you'll need a JDK and Maven. Make sure you've installed both on your machine and also set the environment variables. You can go to Project Structure and add a JDK, then right-click on your top-level project folder to add framework support and add Maven to your project if it's not there already. In this case, we don't necessarily want to add it in the Quickstart folder because this is not our test folder. This actually contains more than one test. I'm just showing you how you can add Maven to your project if needed. What I'm going to do is actually delete the pom.xml because this is not our test directory. And then I'm going to go in and reopen the 3.03 folder that does contain our test project files. Open the 3.03 test code package in its own IntelliJ IDE. It should automatically detect that this is a Maven project, and you can see that if you see the icon on the right-hand side of the screen. Maven projects automatically come with a pom.xml at the top level, and there is a pom.xml directly within the 3.03 directory. When you run the command mvn clean test, you should see your test start running. Then the browser you have selected for your tests should pop up and run the tests that you see. In the next example, we're going to modify the base test and the config file and start running our tests on Sauce Labs.